Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our kickoff webinar of the Town Forest Recreation Planning webinar series. This is a 5-week series and is part of the Town Forest Recreation Planning Initiative that we will hear about today. Originally, these were going to be in-person events, but we had to adapt to the current situation, and we have an excellent series of presenters and topics scheduled. I hope you will join us to learn more about trails and wildlife, connecting trails to downtown, trail building and maintenance, and Mountain Bike Trails 101. My name is Gwen Kozlowski, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator with the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program. We have quite a number of friends of our program in attendance today, but for those of you who are new to us, the UCF team is a collaborative effort between UVM Extension and the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. We provide technical, educational, and financial assistance to support communities in stewarding their tree resources. You can learn more about our work at vtcommunityforestry.org. Before I hand it over, I've got a few housekeeping items. Your microphones will be muted during the presentation, and there is no video option for participants. If you have questions during the webinar, please put them in the question box in the side panel, and we highly encourage you to share your experience, suggestions, and lesson learned during this webinar. Kate has some opportunities to stop and check in with your experiences, and for those opportunities, please use the chat box, which is located below the question box on the bottom of that side panel. And using the chat box actually allows all participants to be able to see your comments and suggestions. With the question box, only I am able to see those questions. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website later today, and I will also email out the link to anyone who is registered for this webinar. There will be a survey that pops up at the end, so please take a few minutes to share your feedback and thoughts. It will help us plan more opportunities that are aligned with your needs. And we are delighted to have so many of you on today. I think this really highlights the importance of today's topics. And we are fortunate to have Kate Forer, UCF's own community forestry specialist and town forest extraordinaire. She will be walking us through her incredible work over the past few years on the Town Forest Recreation Planning Initiative. But before I hand it over to Kate, I just wanted to do a few quick polls to get a sense of who is in the audience. So I'm going to launch these polls. First one is, where are you located? And we've got a few options for based on counties in Vermont and if you are outside of Vermont. I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to fill this poll out. And every once in a while, there's a blip for some participants who won't be able to share, but my apologies there. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. We actually have the majority of folks in central Vermont, a couple of folks from Northwest, a couple in the Northeast Kingdom, about a quarter in southern Vermont, and a few folks outside of Vermont. Excellent. And I'm going to launch the next one is, who is present today? Who are you representing? Are you a Town Forest Committee member, Conservation Commission member, Select Board member, municipal staff, or just here to learn a little bit more? I'll give you about another 10 seconds or so to fill out this poll. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this one. We actually have about 60% here to learn a little bit more, one select board member, a few municipal staff, a good portion Conservation Commission, and a few Town Forest Committee members. Excellent. And I have one last poll for right now is, have you seen an increase of your town forest or community space since March? Just curious if you've seen an interest, so just because of our current situation. Yes, it's been overwhelming. Yes, a moderate increase, same amount or normal, and less than average. About another 10 seconds and I'll close this poll. All right, thank you for voting. I'm going to close this. We've got a couple of folks that say, yes, it's been overwhelming. 70% say yes, a moderate increase. A few say the same amount or normal, and a couple of folks say less than average. All right, thank you for sharing your feedback. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kate. Oh, Kate, we can't hear you. Hey, Kate. I think we have lost Kate. 1 minute while I try and figure out our technical difficulty here. All right, let's see. Kate, does this work here? I can't hear you. We did have Kate. Hold on 1 second. Okay, hold on 1 second. It looks like Kate is joining us again, and stay tuned.
Hi, Gwen, I'm back. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm gonna make you the presenter. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Okay. So let me just pull the presentation up again. Sorry about that, folks. And you know, what's a webinar in Vermont without a little technical difficulty? I I guess I should say that I have been having some issues with my laptop. So if it happens again, just bear with me. And I will do my best. I'm not sure what's happening, but occasionally my laptop has a blue error message and the whole thing shuts down. So
boy.
again,
Well,
not
we're
a
glad
simple.
that got you back quickly. So sorry if you missed my intro, but we're ready to go, Kate.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much, Gwen, for that introduction. Hello, everybody. And again, apologies for that little glitch and kicking it off. I really appreciate everybody's joining us today. As Gwen said, my name is Kate Four. I work with the Urban and Community Forestry team, leading up our team at UVM Extension. As Gwen mentioned, our program is a partnership between UVM Extension and Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. I live in central Vermont, so I was really excited to hear about all the folks who are joining us today from my neck of the woods. For the last 5 years or so, my work with the UCF team has really centered around community forestry. And so I'm really excited today to share some of the work that we've been doing around town forest recreation planning and supporting municipalities and communities in the management and care for our town forests. Also, as Gwen mentioned in the introduction, I'm really hoping that today's webinar is interactive. So if you have comments or questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the chat box or the question box as Gwen indicated. Commissioner Mike Snyder used to say that Vermont's town forests are really one of our best kept secrets. And it's something that's really always stuck with me. I think, you know, Vermont is special for so many different reasons. But here in Vermont, I think we have a really unique and important resource in our town forests. And in fact, actually, as a program and with our partners over the years, you know, we like to think that our town forests actually make our communities better. And they provide so many different benefits and values, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think it's important to start by saying that Vermont has over 67,000 acres of forest land owned by municipalities. You know, that's a pretty exciting and staggering number when you think about it. There's over 249 individual town forest parcels, and these numbers are growing, you know, every year as new community forests are acquired, as new town forests are acquired, and are added to our resource of town forests here in Vermont. One of the things that makes town forests so special is that they're all open for Vermonters and visitors alike to enjoy, to get out, to recreate. It's a place to get out and be in the woods, you know, whether you are a hunter or a hiker. And it's really no secret that, you know, especially in the time, as Gwen mentioned, the time that we're in now, you know, in a global pandemic facing, you know, the COVID-19 situation, just really how important these local places are for folks to be able to get out and recreate. In fact, you know, given the situation and the governor's stay at home and stay safe order, I would argue that our town forests are really more important than ever. And I'm curious, you know, in the chat box, you know, how many of you guys live within 10 miles of a town forest? You can see here on the right of your screen, this is actually a screenshot from our website, and it's a GIS layer of all the town forests that are currently in our database in Vermont. I realize that some are potentially missing, but it just shows you how many town forests really there are in the state. So if you have one within a 10-mile radius of your home, we'd love to hear from you in the chat box. You can just make a note of it, or maybe even tell us the name of it. As public forests, our town forests provide a whole host of values and benefits, as I mentioned earlier, you know, from environmental benefits, you know, in fact, actually, historically, a lot of our town forests were created in order to protect drinking water for communities. But these days, they provide so much more than that. They provide a place for people to get out and recreate, as I said, a place for folks to gather with neighbors when and if it's appropriate, obviously, given the times. But, you know, regardless of the size, you know, town forests are really, you know, not only diverse in terms of their values, but a complex space for our public to engage with the environment. You know, Vermont is fortunate to have so many different town forests, and they really range in size. Some are, you know, small as 20 acres, probably even smaller. I don't know the smallest one off the top of my head, but they can also be, you know, 700 acres. So our town forests really vary by the acreage. You know, over the years, we've heard from so many different communities, you know, about some of the increasing challenges that you're facing as you manage these spaces and these public lands. And here is just a few examples of some of the challenges that we've heard, whether it's multiple use, you know, or conflicting user interactions. You know, not all forms of recreation work well together. As many of you probably have experienced. And so, you know, communities are sometimes really challenged by trying to balance, you know, allowing use with creating a healthy ecosystem and protecting and, you know, managing the forest for health. A lack of infrastructure, I know, you know, for many communities is a significant challenge, both in terms of the physical infrastructure, you know, whether it's parking lots or, you know, facilities, but also there's a new term that I've been starting to use called civic infrastructure. So just the lack of, you know, kind of capacity at the community level to make decisions and you know, really be the caretakers and stewards of these town forests. Obviously, economic development, you know, and connecting a town forest to support local businesses and vice versa is challenging for many communities, as well as an overall lack of use or access. You know, even given the times and increasing interest around the state in terms of forest-based recreation, we know that there's, for many communities, people just don't know about their town forest. There's a lack of awareness that this resource even exists. And so that's a challenge for many communities is to get the word out for residents to be able to get out and use the town forest, as well as access. We know from many communities around the state that there's a challenge around, year-round access. So whether it's, access by foot or getting cars, into an easy hike to a town forest, access can be a real challenge. And then connectivity. Again, as we know, there's such a robust interest in the state right now around forest-based recreation, and so communities I think around the state are trying to figure out how to connect their town forest with some of the other private or public trail networks in order to make the experience, bigger, better for users.
And Kate, I have a quick poll too, if we want to see what the biggest challenge that folks face in their town forest or community space.
Yeah, that sounds great, Gwen.
All right, I'll launch that now. And I recognize that there's one issue that I'm seeing, that folks can see the chat box, but they're unable to type in it and only to type in the question box. So my apologies there. I'm not sure what snafu is happening. But it looks like we'll give another 10 seconds or so on this poll. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close. And it looks like it's evenly split, Kate, between multiple use and user interactions, lack of infrastructure, and lack of use and access. And there's a few folks for connectivity and economic development.
Great, thanks so much, Gwen, and that's so interesting to hear. And again, if folks have other challenges that they'd like to share, please don't hesitate to just enter them in the question box. I believe, Gwen, that's available to folks to enter in.
Yes, John McNearney says our biggest challenge is getting to a town forest. Ed O'Leary says, I live within 1 mile of our town forest.
Awesome. Great. And so, yeah, so, just like I said, John, just you're not alone in being able to access, the town forest. It's certainly a challenge. And unlike our public lands, or I should say our state and federal public lands, our town forests are really, don't have the diverse teams and established processes and staff really behind them to support some of the decision making and management activities that need to go on in order to, again, sort of maintain that balance between forest health and use. Most of our town forests here in Vermont are all managed by volunteers. I realize there's some municipal folks on the call today, and obviously, towns and municipal staff play a really important role in caring and managing for town forests. But the bulk of the work here in Vermont is done by dedicated, passionate volunteers, who either serve on their conservation commission, serve on a town forest committee, or volunteer out in the woods just to keep the forest healthy and accessible to folks. And so to help support communities, in managing our town forests, our program, the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program, applied for a grant from the U.S. Forest Service to develop a planning process and as well as some tools to really create a robust engagement process to understand the needs of town forests and then develop actions and strategies to help communities meet those needs. So specifically, our program sought to work with 10 communities to develop these action plans. And then in addition to developing the plan, we really, we very strategically in the beginning wanted to create a whole suite of resources. We realized that working with 10 communities was really an opportunity to try out a planning process and sort of model a planning process. But we really wanted the impact of this work to be much broader and to support more communities. And so in addition to working with these 10 communities, the project really sought to create a toolkit where all of the resources and information that was developed as a part of the work with these 10 communities could live and provide an opportunity for other communities to replicate the planning process. And then the final part of the initiative that we've been working on really is delivering these educational programs. And as Gwen mentioned at the beginning, we had a whole series of in-person events planned for 2020. Obviously, given the way of the world right now, things have changed quite a bit. And so we're really excited to be offering this webinar series as a way to help share some of the great resources and work and research out there around town forests management and specifically recreation in town forests. Our project team, just I want to give a quick shout out to our collaborators. You know, you can't really do work in Vermont without being collaborative. And so we had a core group of folks really supporting us in the work and really helping to guide the work that we did with the 10 communities and also the development of the planning model. And you can see the names here on the screen. I'm not going to read them off, but we had folks from Vermont Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, you know, Agency of Commerce and Community Development was really instrumental in the beginning and sort of all of their work around Irene and giving us a model to think about community planning. I like to say that, you know, sometimes with the Urban and Community Forestry Program, you know, we're really experts in trees and tree care and forests, but in terms of community planning, this was sort of a newer area for us to play in. And so we were really appreciative of the support of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development and all their work in community planning to help guide us in the development of this model. And then also Lisa Chase, you know, my colleague at UVM Extension, who's done a tremendous amount of work in terms of tourism at the Vermont Tourism Center. In addition to our partners, you know, this project was so successful really because in addition to our core team, we had the opportunity to hire 2 consultants. And the main consultant was Drew Pollock Bruce with SE Group, who was really, you know, he was sort of the brain behind the development of the community planning model and worked very closely with all 10 communities, really to kind of provide that assistance for them to undergo the planning process, but also helped us understand sort of and develop the resources in order to allow other communities to go through the process after the initial 10 communities had finished. Arrowwood Environmental was also a consultant on the project and was very helpful in helping us develop our guidelines around natural resources and use in town forests. All right, so here you can see on the screen here the 10 communities that we worked with. I'm not going to actually read them all off right now. You can see them yourself, and the map there to kind of show how they're diverse around or spread out around the state. You know, as I said in the beginning, unfortunately, we only really had the capacity to work with 10 communities initially, and so when we were planning this project, we really wanted to strike a balance of diversity in terms of the communities that we were working with. So some of the criteria that we were thinking about were location, you know, where in the state are the communities located, but also, you know, size of town forest parcels. We wanted to get a range of, like I said in the beginning, sort of smaller parcels as well as larger parcels. We also looked at management planning, management and planning history to get a sense of kind of where each of these communities were in terms of stages of planning. And then finally, looking at challenges. We really wanted to make sure that we were seeing a whole range of challenges to kind of get a sense of the full suite of challenges that communities are facing. So I'd love to hear from you. And you know, Gwen just talked about just did the poll. She kind of jumped the gun a little bit. You know, I was intending to use the chat box to hear more about your challenges, but if you have any more challenges or thoughts to share, please feel free to use the question box to share those.
Yes, and Kate, we have a few coming in. So Edward is worried about the balance between advertising the forest and about overuse. We've got sufficient. Oh, Darren in Essex is worried about sufficient staffing, and organization is definitely a challenge in Essex. And Mary Ellen has noted neighbors who don't want visitors. And Sarah is in Cambridge. They are in the process of their first town-owned nature preserve, and the town voted to accept the 51-acre town parcel 51-acre parcel at town meeting, and really happy to have the opportunity to join this webinar because this kind of planning is exactly what they need right now.
Excellent. That's great. What great timing. And thank you everybody for sharing some of those challenges. In terms of the presentation today, my goal is really to outline the process that we went through, to share a little bit about the project. But I also, as one of the biggest lessons learned that I came out of this process, the planning, the planning process with, is understanding that you guys as a network, are really an important piece to supporting and answering some of these questions and sharing some of these experiences around some of the challenges that you're having. So thank you. So keep those comments coming.
Yeah,
So
here's just a few more, Kate, just to quickly add into that. So when looking at the connectivity from Virginia, what are the resources for towns to improve class 4 roads that are already seeing multiple uses? And the good news is that folks learn about it, and the bad news when everybody finds out about it, overloved or expansion to different use. So I think we've got a lot of similar themes coming through.
yeah, that's, it's funny. We oftentimes, and I think it was Commissioner Snyder again who coined the phrase that our town forests are in many cases actually being loved to death. And I started off by saying that sometimes, we call them our best kept secret. But sometimes I follow that up with saying that unfortunately the secret is out, right? That some of our town forests are definitely starting to see the impact of overuse. And so we'll talk a little bit more about kind of some of the tools and resources that have been created to help communities in thinking about that, and really getting a sense as to what that means, and really, is that happening in your town forest? So I've broken out the presentation into 3 parts, and so I just want to kind of share sort of what we'll be talking about today. And the first one is the kind of overall steps of the town forest planning process. I'll outline the steps and some of the phases and give you an idea of kind of what the process looks like. And then we'll talk about and we'll look at the toolkit that we developed. And again, I'll pull out some of the resources that we developed that I think will be really helpful to you folks, after the webinar today. And then finally, I wanted to end on a community story and share a highlight from one of the communities that went through the planning process. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So the overall, the planning process was designed to be, as easy to follow as possible. And so, and Drew, in his brilliance, really broke it into kind of 4 main phases. The first one, it really gets at the heart, I think, of the overall goal of the process of the development of the plan, which is to understand and capture, and even in many cases define, the community's vision for the town forest. And in that is, to try to, we've built in ways to try to get a robust community engagement to understand the needs of the community, but also the values that the community holds around their town forest. The second phase is strategy development. And really, again, the idea is that sort of building on the definition of, or the vision, the creation of that vision, is, to help communities in understanding or creating strategies to be able to achieve that vision. And then finally, the third phase really is to take those strategies and turn them into steps, right? And that's the real heart of what a plan is sort of taking these big ideas, sort of analyzing the need, understanding the need, and then turning it into action steps to be able to make improvements or adjustments on the ground. And that brings us to the phase 4, which is implementation. One of the, again, I said it before, but, sort of, I think for me, one of the most exciting parts of this planning process, is that we really took that implementation piece seriously, and that you'll see have developed a whole suite of tools, not just to help you develop the plan, but once those strategies are identified and the steps have been identified to meet those strategies, we've provided you with a whole host of tools to help you implement those steps and those strategies. All right, so this slide has a ton of text, and I'm not going to walk you through each one of these steps, but I do want to just highlight the fact that at the end of the webinar, I'll share with you the website where you can go for more information on each one of these steps. It actually lives within the toolkit, but we we broke the process down into what I kind of call 10 easy steps. And I would say, the step one is probably one of the most important. I don't know how many of you have a advisory committee for your town forest. A lot of times, like I said, the Conservation Commission serves that role. Sometimes communities have a town forest committee. But in this planning process, one of the first and again, one of the most important steps is to create a community steering committee, really to help serve as the champion of the planning process. And as you'll see in the toolkit, we provide some guidance on who to select and how to think about, who might be on that steering committee. But it's important to realize that these may not be people who, and frankly, probably aren't the people who are using the town forest every day. Again, these are folks within the community who can help you champion the planning process. And so it's important when you're assembling that steering committee to think about the diversity of voices and opinions within the community and really identify those key folks who should be engaged and help to support the planning process to its completion. The steps 3 and 4 really get to understanding that community need. So as you'll see in a second, there's multiple points during the planning process where the community is engaged and actually invited to open houses and events to come share their ideas, share their concerns, and really have a voice in the future of the town forest. So I tried to kind of take that 10-step process and lay out what a year of town forest planning would look like. And so when we did our planning process for the 10 communities, we actually kicked it off in January. But this process I think could be launched any time of year, not necessarily in January. And the process itself is really flexible. But here are sort of the milestones, if you will, or the events I think that it might be helpful to share a little bit more about, so you understand kind of how the process unfolds. So the first is a visioning workshop. And this was actually, again, we held these in January, and communities actually had planning boards or big boards set up around a community space like a town hall or the library, and invited folks to come in for 15, 20 minutes, sort of come and go as they pleased, to actually put dots on boards, and answering different questions around use or desired future uses of their town forest. Again, to sort of help define what the need is at the local level, but also to help sort of create that community vision for what the town forest could be. We also engaged in town forest walks. And here I have it, I've outlined these as either a, kind of a step that focused on community engagement or involved the steering committee. But the town forest walk, actually, for many communities who had steering committee members who weren't familiar with the town forest, was really an important first step in getting the steering committee out into the woods, exposing them to some of the on the ground challenges, sort of provided an opportunity for folks to see firsthand, what was really happening in the town forest. A community survey, we actually, throughout the entire process, I think there was somewhere in the ballpark of, 1,500, 1,600 responses to the community surveys in all 10 communities. As the total of all 10 of the communities. This was a survey that went out for many communities at town meeting day, where they solicited, again, just on a paper survey or on an online survey, information from the community about community's needs or desires or ideas for the future of the town forest. And then you can see, it keeps going down. So the steering committee really played an important role in, through the development of the strategies, synthesizing all that information. So taking that community survey information, the information that folks provided when they came to the open house as part of the visioning workshop, and turning that into draft strategies. So you can see, that the steering committee really plays an important role in helping to compile all this information and winnow it down into actual actionable steps. And then the rest of the process, is sort of once those actionable strategies have been identified, are sort of sharing that back out with the community. So there was a strategies workshop where the steering committee shared back out what they'd heard, and solicited additional feedback from the community to make sure that that they understood, and that they'd heard correctly what the community wants. And again, that process was done through an open house style um, evening event where folks were able to come in and actually put dots on boards, and actually sit down with maps and lay out, kind of identify areas of the forest that they thought the different strategies would apply to, or actually start to kind of think about some of the strategies that were identified and how they might be implemented on the ground. So that should give you just a quick kind of overview of the planning process and sort of how it flowed throughout the year. And then the final last steps were not only finalizing the plan, but then sharing that plan, that draft plan, back out to the community through a plan presentation workshop. And in some cases, that was shared back out to the whole community, but other times that was just shared back out to the select board. Again, to keep the select board and community leaders engaged in the planning process, and to solicit their input before the plan was finalized. So a couple of quick highlights from the planning process that I just wanted to share, kind of based on the feedback from the 10 communities, were, just one, just how incredibly important it is to engage all voices within the community. I mentioned in the beginning, when you're creating that steering committee, how important it is to make sure that there's a diversity of voices represented on the steering committee. But in all these points throughout the process, when you're seeking that public input, it's really important to make sure that you're reaching out to all aspects and all areas of your community, all voices within your community, to get their ideas and to understand their needs. The other, highlight or sort of takeaway, I guess, if you will, is to meet people where they already are. This sounds a little funny today because obviously many of us are at home, and we're not out in community gatherings. But when life returns to normal, thinking about this planning process as a way to meet people, at various community events where they already are gathered. Even little things like holding informational meetings, or soliciting input from community surveys by putting the community survey in the library, where folks may see it and grab it and take it home and fill it out, but they may not be able to attend an evening meeting. So again, sort of thinking about kind of the aspects of the planning process, and identifying ways to meet your community where they are already gathering, and make it easy for them to engage, was I think a big takeaway for a lot of the communities. Again, I think we had some really great participation from the communities that were engaged in the pilot. And part of that was, thinking strategically as a steering committee about how they were going to engage the community. The toolkit, which I'll talk about in a little bit, provides a ton of promotional materials, templates for communities to use to help get the word out about events, but also provides some guidance on, thinking about where people are already gathered, and what community events, you might want to engage people at. I'll roll through the other ones here. Obviously utilizing formal and informal community networks. As we all know, within communities there are formal and informal networks, and just understanding kind of how to use that to be able to solicit input from the community on town forest planning, I think is really helpful. And again, sometimes that means engaging and asking neighbors or folks, to kind of be that bridge, to help connect, those networks to the work that you're doing, and trying to solicit input on the town forest is really beneficial. Using resources, and again, I'm going to skip over this one because we're going to look at more the toolkit and some of the other resources in a little bit. But I just wanted to share too that, I think one of the takeaways for a lot of communities is that, when we think about resources, a lot of times we think about publications or websites, but Vermont is really fortunate in our people resource as well. As you know, Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation has our county foresters who are really, great resource for communities and thinking about and engaging in planning, as well as all of our nonprofit organizations around the state, the organizations like Land Trust and the Trust for Public Land. There's a number of other partner organizations that I think can be really helpful for communities to engage with in the planning process. And then the final takeaway, and this probably comes as no surprise to many of you, is that at a lot of these, at any community planning event, it's always helpful and important to provide food. When we did our town forest recreation planning process, I think we went through somewhere in the ballpark of over 2,000 cookies and crackers that were provided to participants at each of the events. So we can confirm the fact that food definitely does bring people out. Again, this is before COVID-19, but hopefully when life returns to normal, it'll be a motivator as well. So those are just some of the kind of takeaways and a brief overview of the overall planning process. Gwen, I was hoping to use the chat box, but maybe we could use the question box just for
Yep.
folks to share strategies that they've used to engage people, either in in knowing about your town forest or in planning and managing your town forest.
Absolutely. If you guys wanted to take a minute to answer that question in the question box. In the meantime, Kate, there was just a quick question from Sarah. Where was the log cabin in that photo in the previous slide?
Oh, thanks, Sarah. That's actually the ski hut at the Hardwick Town Forest. So I don't know, Sarah, if you're from Hardwick, but you might have recognized that photo. But that is in Hardwick, I believe. Oh no, I'm sorry. I actually think that's in. I'm sorry. There were two of the communities that we worked with had ski huts. I think that's actually Wethersfield. Um, Hardwick actually has a ski hut that they maintain skis for users to be able to borrow, so that they can come to the ski hut, borrow skis, and then go out into the town forest. And Wethersfield actually has a old log cabin that they're in the process of deciding what they want to do with as a community. So as I'm looking at that picture again, I believe it's actually the Wethersfield log cabin and not the Hardwick one. But that's in thinking about kind of in identifying your existing resources, which is what we'll talk about next when we talk about the toolkit. Having a log cabin in your town forest provides a really exciting opportunity.
Absolutely. And Drew did confirm that that is Wethersfield.
It is. Oh, hi, Drew.
Yes.
I'm so glad that you're on.
And a few
Great.
other folks have chimed in with their strategies. Mike Purcell hosts educational events and tours. Paul Chambers uses free public programming that takes place in the town forest to introduce folks to the space. That's excellent. Darren in Essex uses Front Porch Forum, on-site tabling, partnerships with neighboring residents and businesses. Len Schmidt harvested trees in the town forest to provide lumber for a library bookcase. And Heidi in Salisbury conducted a survey around values and visions for the town forest, and they're getting ready to develop a management plan.
Oh, that's great. And I mean, those are all such great strategies that folks are using. And thank you so much for sharing. There's so much, like I said before, there's so much wealth and information when we share and we understand kind of what other folks are doing, and the strategies that are working in communities. All right, so let's dive into the toolkit. Like I said in the beginning, the planning process is really, the framework or the steps to develop a plan. And so, from the very beginning of this process, we wanted to be able to provide you with the tools to help you as a community be able to complete that plan. We had this real fortunate opportunity to work with Drew Pollock Bruce and the folks at SE Group really to help us devise what I think is a very simple planning process. But in addition to that, to help us compile all of the tools and all of the resources and materials to help communities in actually being able to take action on each of those steps. So the toolkit itself actually lives on the Urban and Community Forestry website, and you can see the URL there at the bottom. And I think Gwen has added that to the chat box. So I encourage you to, after the webinar today, to take a trip over to the website and check it out for yourself. The toolkit it's actually, well, let me stop here and go back. It's actually divided into really kind of two ways for users to access it. The first is to access it by going into those individual planning steps. So the step-by-step planning icon there is one way to get in. And then the second way to get in is to access what we call these planning pods. So let me just start with the planning process. So you can see here all the slide that I showed around the 10-step process. Each one of those steps is linked in the toolkit with resources. You can see it's hyperlinked here. So there's not only a description with more information on what that step entails, but it also has a link in each of those steps to the resources that you need to complete that step in the toolkit pods. So you can see here, so this is an example. Again, step one is creating a steering committee. You can see there's a description of it, a hyperlink to the steering committee guidance document that really lays out the role and the responsibility of the steering committee, and then a link to the public engagement pod where that guidance document lives, as well as other resources for that step. The pods are, really where a lot of the materials to engage in the planning process live. And you can see here they're broken out into 6 different planning pods, basically. Existing conditions and assessment pod, the public engagement pod, the natural resource pod, the plan development pod, the implementation pod, and then the town forest stories pod. And when you go to the website, actually, each one of these icons, these images here, are actually hyperlinked. So you can just click on that pod name, and it'll take you directly to the pod that you're interested in learning more about. So I'll start with the existing conditions pod. So here you'll find all of the kind of information to help you understand what conditions exist, not only on the ground in your town forest, but also in your community. In the visioning workshop that I mentioned earlier, those planning boards that are lined up around the public space include ways for the public to provide input and information, on their needs or on their vision for the town forest, but they also provide a way for the community to get a better understanding of, the community profile, we call it. And so that's like all the information to help folks understand, what are the demographics of your community? When you're thinking about the town forest, who lives in your community, demographically, and other, aspects of the community. I can't remember all the different components right now, but basically the community profile is one piece of that pod, and where you would go to find the information that you would need to pull together a community profile to help the folks who engage in the visioning workshop understand more about your community. It's also where all the mapping resources live, so information on how to compile base maps, or baseline maps for the workshops, but also for the steering committee to understand sort of existing resources, both in terms of baseline maps for the town forest, but also looking more broadly around your community. So, do you just have one town forest parcel? Are there multiple parcels? Are there other conserved lands in your community? So pulling together all that existing, information is really one of the first steps of the planning process. We also in this pod provide information and resources for volunteer trail counting. So forms to help you understand how many users are currently using your town forest. When are they using it? What types of uses are going on in your town forest? And so actually, I've pulled that out here, and you can see this is the volunteer trail counting form that lives in the existing conditions and assessment pod. So volunteers actually can go out and and on a Saturday afternoon or a weekday evening, and get a sense of existing use in the town forest. The natural resources pod provides kind of everything you need to know around the natural resources in your town forest. So it's information on how to inventory natural resources, how to compile existing data. As many of you know, there's a lot of information, ANR, Atlas, BioFinder. There's a lot of different tools out there now to understand the natural resources within our town forest. And so there's guidance to help compile a lot of that information. There's also guidance, like I mentioned in the beginning, Arrowwood Environmental was really instrumental in helping us pull together some guidelines to think about existing natural resources in the town forest and what uses are compatible. So I'll talk more about that in a second, but that is a document that lives within the natural resource pod. There's also in the natural resource pod templates and proposed or models for proposed use. So, how does your community handle it if, a chapter of the local mountain biking association wants to build a trail in your town forest? This provides you with a model for how a town forest committee or the conservation commission or how the community might think about whether or not to allow a certain use in your town forest. And then there's some like a questionnaire that provides sort of a level of review once that that use has been proposed. So to help you think through what some of those criteria are, what some of those guiding ideas might be to help you decide what's acceptable and not within your town forest. So the natural resource guidelines I was just talking to, this is a document that that Arrowwood actually was instrumental in putting together for us. And basically what it is it's a, I think it looks at over 12 or 13 different ecosystems, things from vernal pools to early successional forests to interior forests to mast stands to, lakes and ponds and wetlands, and helps you think through kind of what that acceptable management or acceptable uses might look like in that ecosystem. So you can see here the example on the screen is from vernal pools. And so, if you have a vernal pool in your town forest, what might hiking trails, be, how might hiking trails be compatible or not compatible within the town forest? And you can see here there's compatibility compatibility matrix with comments, because it's not always black and white. So it's a tool to help you think through compatibility of uses around natural resources. All right, the next pod that I wanted to just share briefly about is the public engagement pod. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on this because I've already talked a lot about the different phases or ways that public engagement happens throughout the planning process. But this is where a lot of those materials live. So everything from promotional materials and templates to guidance on meeting and facilitation. This is where the community survey lives. And then guidance for the steering committee in terms of interpreting all of the public input that comes through the planning process. So you can see here, here's a just quick sample of the town forest survey that lives in this pod. It's a Word document, so a community can easily adjust it or edit it or revise it to include local questions or to be adapted to meet your needs. The next pod is the plan development pod. And this is really provides you with the guidance for, again, sort of, how to synthesize all the information that you've received from the community and actually start developing those strategies and action-based steps that'll provide really the backbone of your plan. So you'll see here there's templates and guidance on crafting a vision statement. We also include the plans from all 10 of the pilot communities, so you can see the plans from the other communities. There's a Word plan document template, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The whole template for the plan is there. You can revise it and adapt it to meet your community's needs. We also provide you with information on the strategies that the other 10 communities came up with. And that's a really helpful tool, so you can see, based on different themes, what strategies, your community might be interested in pursuing. So here's just a quick example. This is the plan template. Again, it's in Word. So, you can easily be adapted to meet your community's needs. And then second, but not not, it's not the last one, but second to last is the implementation pod. And so this is, where again, we've housed all the materials that you would need to implement your plan. Everything from fundraising ideas, we have lists of grant opportunities, with a lot of descriptive information to help you understand whether or not it's a good fit for your community. There's also, trail signage best practices, standard recreation improvement costs. This is a document that gives you basically kind of a ballpark figure of, what it might cost for various recreation improvements that you might be interested in seeing in your town forest. So there's a lot of great information in this implementation pod to help you take kind of those next steps in terms of the strategies that you've identified. And I just wanted to highlight one of those, excellent resources is the Trail Design Guide. Again, this was really, really the work of Drew Pollock Bruce and the SE group, pulling together this document to really consolidate and provide kind of a go-to resource for best practices around trail design and development. And you can see here they've created profiles for various uses, both motorized and non-motorized, everything from hiking to horseback riding. So you can see that, gives you information on how wide the trail should be. What are some of the considerations? And again, this is meant to be a guide to help you sort of in thinking about trails in your town forest. And then finally, the Town Forest Stories pod is, there's actually only 6 in this image here, but they're all 10 of the town forests that we worked with, and the communities that we worked with have a case study. And so the Town Forest Stories pod is where those case studies live. And the idea is that this is, where you can go to understand some of the lessons learned, or understand a little bit more about all 10 of the communities that went through the planning process, to help you as you embark on your planning process. So with that, I did have a quick question for folks. I know that was a pretty quick overview of the toolkit, but I'm curious if there's anything that folks are excited about, or if there's any particular aspect of the toolkit that you think is going to be most useful for your community. And Gwen, I was hoping that maybe.
Yep. Yeah, Darren from Essex already chimed in that the management plan template was amazing and a huge help. And trail design from Mike Purcell.
Awesome. And so I should say the trail design guide is actually it's actually not up on the toolkit as of this morning, but it should be up in the next day.
Later this afternoon.
Okay, we had to take it down to provide a couple of quick edits, but it will be up by the end of the day, thanks to Gwen and her amazing work formatting that, taking care of that. So while folks are, I'd love to hear more from folks about, what aspects of the toolkit they're excited about. But just given the time, I wanted to share a quick community story. And, I don't know if anybody on the webinar this afternoon, or this morning, is from the town of Huntington. But Huntington was one of the 10 communities that we worked with. And it was a really interesting story because they have a 100-acre town forest that has been owned by the community for a long time, but it was an issue around access. The current existing town forest did not have year-round access, and it was only accessible in the wintertime. And so that was one of the major challenges that their community was facing. And so they really used this planning process to go to the community to say, should we continue to pursue access options around our existing town forest, or should we start looking towards acquiring a new town forest? And so you can see here from their visioning framework, when the community provided input during the survey, these are some of the responses that they got. The one on the left is existing conditions, and you can see folks use words like limited, none, um, boy, none shows up a lot, unaware, that folks really just felt fairly disconnected from the existing town forest. And then on the desired future conditions framework, vision framework, you can see here some of the words that folks use to describe what they wanted in a town forest. And so words like recreation, walking, accessible, all pop as words that were commonly used among participants and respondents. And so the town, as a part of the recreation planning process, they put this question forward to the town to understand sort of what the town, to get a pulse, if you will, on what the town's interest was in acquiring a new town forest. And you can see this is actually a one of the planning boards from the visioning workshop that that they collected some of this information on. And you can see the orange dots are solidly in the yes camp. And so this the question that they asked was, understanding the limited access of the existing town forest, do you think that there is a need to acquire additional town forests or recreation parcels in Huntington? And you can see here the response from workshop participants was a resounding yes. And so, armed with that information, the community of Huntington partnered with the Trust for Public Land, as well as, I'm sure, multiple other partners, to really start pursuing the creation of a new town forest. And recently, I was told that they've actually now created and purchased, through support with the Forest Service, they've created the Huntington Community Forest, which is a 245-acre property adjacent to the Brewster Pierce Memorial School. So just a really exciting story from Huntington on really the power of the planning process, not only in terms of understanding and the needs and the interest in the community, but really providing those volunteers who are tasked with making those decisions, providing them with the confidence to know that the community, is in support of the decisions, or really the confidence to make those decisions. So that's a quick nutshell. That's what I had planned for today, and so I just wanted to throw up the URL of the Town Forest Recreation Toolkit one more time. You can see it up here on the screen, and I know Gwen has it in the chat box. But just a reminder that this resource is really here for you to use. We're continuing to update it and add more pieces as new resources come online. We also add pieces. The town of Newberry did a survey at their town meeting, and they made some adjustments to the community survey. So I will, in short order here, be uploading that as a template and a model for other communities. So, I hope that over time this continues to grow and be a place where we can share resources. And, if you make adjustments to some of the templates or have resources to share, please feel free to be in touch. So with that, I don't know if we have a minute or two for questions.
We're over time, but I think if folks need to hop off, they can, and we could maybe stay on for a few minutes for questions. There was one great question from Ed O'Leary. Of the top 10 towns you worked with, have any incorporated their town forest plan into their overall town plan?
Yeah, Ed, that's a really good question. And, actually, as a committee, our group of partners early on, really, we actually had some pretty robust conversations around whether we were going to require communities to incorporate their town forest recreation plan and to, actually have it officially adopted by the community. And so, for various reasons, actually, we decided not to make that a requirement of the process. Although I would say, that the presentation process at the very end really is intended to start that conversation at the local level. I know I was a part of some of those presentations with the 10 towns that we worked with, where the select board said, what can we do to support this? And, can we add a letter of support, to the recreation plan, saying that this is important work, and that we, fully support the strategies that have been identified. So we worked with a number of communities, to help implement that, so that as communities came through the planning process and then went to look for funding opportunities, they had that letter of support associated with the plan that they had created to take forward to funders. So I hope that helps, Ed. I think it's, I guess my short answer would be, I think it's a case by case, town by town decision, to the level that the recreation plans get officially adopted. But I'm curious, and if there's anybody else out there who has developed a town forest recreation plan or is working on it, what your thoughts are in terms of whether or not the town should officially adopt it.
I haven't seen a comment come through on that, but John was curious, and you touched on this a little bit, but funding opportunities to help with acquire a town forest.
Yeah, so John, there's in the toolkit itself, there's a section that talks about grants in the implementation pod with links to the various grants and funding opportunities for acquisition. The story of Huntington was actually, a grant that was secured from the Forest Service in the community forestry. I think it's called the Community Forestry Open Space grant. And actually, that was, I think, work that the town of Huntington did with the Trust for Public Lands. Kate Wanner with the Trust for Public Lands, I think, was really instrumental in helping the community connect to that as a resource. And so I would say, if you're looking for funding opportunities, and are interested in acquiring a town forest, working with your local land trust, the Vermont Land Trust or the Trust for Public Lands, can be a really beneficial partnership in helping to kind of navigate that process.
Great. And Darren in Essex had contributed to the previous question that the town forest plans should be referenced in the town plan, but not sure there's a benefit to requiring that. Lots of legal and logistical issues.
Yeah, thanks, Darren, and I appreciate you mentioning the town plan, because that is true. As we all know, as forest and forestry, is now required to be integrated into the town plan. I think that's an excellent point, that your town forest should be in reference within your town plan. And it was a lot of those questions around the legality and that led us to not necessarily make it a requirement for the recreation plan to be officially adopted by the town. But again, I think that there are ways that the select board, can share their approval and, support for the development of the plan, and things like a letter of support, I think, can go a long way, especially if you're looking for funding, to implement aspects of your plan, to show that not only, have you gone through this process to develop the plan, but you have the support of municipal leadership behind you.
Great, and I think that covers most of the general questions. If there's something that you weren't able to, they wanted to ask that wasn't covered, please feel free to email me afterwards. And Harris Rowan wanted to just make a comment too, and for funding, some towns can generate funds from well-managed timber sales, and I think that's an important point to bring up. And Kate, if you wanted to comment on that, and then maybe we could wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely, Harris. That's a great point. And, one of the things I like to encourage communities is to think about, either whether they're creating a timber sale and creating revenue from that, to reinvest that back in the town forest. And that could be done through a variety of ways, through a conservation fund. But, to always think about sort of how you can do active forest management, and be able to practice sustainable forestry on the ground, but also fund local improvements to your forest through infrastructure, or even continued stewardship or trails and that kind of thing. So that's a great point, and certainly something to highlight as a way to fund some of the work that needs to be done in town forests, for sure.
Great. With that, please let me know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, thank you so much, Kate, Town Forest Extraordinaire, and we will hope to see you next week.
Great. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. And you'll see my final slide is just a shout out to the rest of the series. We really hope that you'll take the time to continue to participate. We have an exciting lineup, as Gwen mentioned in the beginning, of other presenters and topics. So hope to see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.